Um, hey everybody, welcome to week something or other. Gary is on PTO this week, so it's just me and Jack. So it will not be as lively, but it'll wrap early. So we both got hard stops that are going to force us to wrap at about 11:45 today, and I am taking the call or the meeting from my new truck, which is an F-150 Lightning, which is great. I learned a lot driving it to Florida after getting it about what it's like to be in an all-electric vehicle, going beyond its initial battery range. And what I will say is that I love this truck, but it is not ready for prime time yet on the EV charging network. So it's like, you know, I I was young enough that although there is a Route 66 in the places that I've grown up, it was a tourist attraction, not like a thing you did. But you know what driving an EV across North Carolina through South Carolina, Georgia to Florida reminds me of is what it might have been like to be on Route 66. The only difference being is that instead of stopping at cool roadside attractions, you're stopping at Walmart supercenters. hoping, hoping you got an EV charger, which is not quite the same as like the world's biggest ball of yarn and you know the other cool stuff that you see as roadside attractions. But I will say, you know, a Walmart, supercenter, outside of Savannah, Georgia, you can see interesting things, Jack. You can see interesting things. So with that in mind, again, welcome everybody. And also remember that we are technically challenged. So there's also odds are that there's a chance we did not actually open up the chat or anything. But if you have anything that you need from us, hit us up on the Q&A. So with that in mind, Jack, I want to turn it over to you because I know you had a couple off-topic things to share before we hop into it.
Yeah, good morning. Way to go on lowering everyone's expectations about the two of us doing this and Gary not being here. So now there's only one way to go, which is up from there. So way to go on setting the floor. As far as traveling down the back roads, yes. Until I came to my senses, my father likes when we were younger on road trips going the back roads and not spending so much time on the interstates. And I kind of continued on with that philosophy until I got impatient. And like, okay, the interstates are built for a reason, and that is to get from one place to another in the most efficient and fast way. So, but yes, many times I would go the back roads to Chapel Hill. I'm sorry, good to know that the EV network is not necessarily where it needs to be. So when people are asking about buying electric vehicles, I've always thought it's kind of interesting. And I know that the response is, well, it's the usage of traditional fuel and pollution to create the electricity versus it being in gas guzzling machines and emitting pollution that way, because you do have to generate the electricity some way. There's that kind of little bit of a joke, but kind of a practical question as to, okay, how is this generated? I am not an engineer by any means, so I will rely upon the expert to tell us certain things. A couple of kind of odd notes. Something that keeps coming up in my mailbox on the legal side of things is this issue of using emojis in communications when you're negotiating contracts. And it's come up a couple of times. And in fact, not in the US yet, but in Canada, there was a case that found that the use of emojis were interpreted a certain way to create a binding contract between the two contracting parties. I'm not aware of any of that happening in the US yet. I found an article, recent article, because again, I was getting bombarded by these things and read it, and I'll share a few things to think about when you're using emojis. Understand that there is a general legal concept that is that, yes, you should have everything in writing. And most contracts, there's an offer and acceptance. A counteroffer is technically a rejection of the initial offer, and you're now the offeror making a counteroffer. So all those concepts apply. But when accepting an offer, in outside of emojis, if you were to say, if they said, okay, how about we do X, Y, and Z? Are you good with that? And you respond back with okay and nothing else, have you entered into a binding contract? And the answer is, as many legal questions are, is maybe, or it depends. So some guidelines that were put together by, I think the law firm who handled that matter in Canada was, talking about the enforceability of emojis. It's always about the context and intent, and that the intended meaning of an emoji needs to be clear and consistent with the contract's purpose. So, a smiley emoji, a thumbs up emoji, whatever it might be, needs to be consistent with the purpose and the intent. Ambiguity and misinterpretation, obviously using emojis is much more subject to interpretation than actual words. And that's saying a lot, because many words are subject to many different types of interpretation. And so this makes that possibility even greater. Supplementing emojis with clear and concise language to help avoid misunderstandings. And then understanding that, and this is maybe applicable across cultures when you're doing work with people in other countries, or maybe just of different backgrounds, that emojis can have different meanings or different contexts depending on your background, your ethnic background, or your experiential background. So keep that in mind. So just some things and really hadn't thought a lot about it until it kept popping up in my inbox from in legal channels. The other thing I wanted to mention is that there was an article published a few days ago from the UK, and I know it's from the UK because they used organizations with an S instead of a Z. But so apparently it's interesting because it was a UK, well, it's Lexology, which is worldwide, but it was an article based from the UK reporting on US stuff, but it deals with international companies. So there are 7 companies who have agreed with the Biden administration to do something with respect to AI. And it's Amazon, Anthropic, Google, Inflection, Meta, Microsoft, and OpenAI. And there's hope that others will join in that context, or in this effort. And the initiatives are ensuring products are safe before introducing them to the public, building systems that put security first, and earning the public's trust, which I think is the most important of all not the most important, but I think the one that, it's you could do those first 2 things and do them really well, and all it takes is a misfire and you lose the public's trust, and that can be very problematic. So the skeptics are saying that, very interesting that these companies so easily, voluntarily, and quickly said, yes, of course, we'll participate in all of this. But their specificity in how they're going to participate or how they're going to implement these things are still unknown and very nebulous. So we'll see what happens with that, but just kind of 2 current events outside of the topic at hand that I wanted to share with all of you.
Cool. Well, I've got my earbuds in for this call, so hopefully the lightning did not hear you about that whole AI regulation thing. But maybe it did, and it's going to plot my demise as I drive to my next destination. But anyway, I appreciate that, Jack, as always. So on to the topic at hand. The last 2 sessions were really all around, hey, here's what you need to do to protect yourself in a partnership. And here's, some stories around what happens if you don't. So what Jack and I thought that we close this series with, I can't believe we're into having series now, Jack, but we're having series now, with is just, it's been a lot of doom and gloom, and, one might leave this saying, oh my gosh, I'll never be in a partnership. And that's actually a thing, for some people. Like, some people are so afraid based on what they hear about bad partnerships that they're unwilling to, and by partnerships, we're generally encompassing that to mean, multiple owners of an organization, not just one. I mean, it doesn't have to be a legal partnership. It could be owners of an S corporation. It could be owners of C corporation stock. It's just more than one legal owner of a closely held business. And the thing is, partnerships can also be wildly successful. So what Jack and I wanted to share is just some of the things that we've learned around, the best practices for making a partnership successful. Because, the key thing to remember about a partnership, and this is really what you ought to ask yourself, going in, like a lot of people, well, it's like a marriage. Do you want to be married to this person? I mean, that there's something to that. But at the same time, you also have a much, you know, some might say it's less painful to get out of a partnership than it is a marriage. But it, the thing is that with partnerships, before going into them, there's some valid reasons for doing it, and they're generally, if you boil it down to its simplest equation, it's the me plus Jack equals three people, not two. At the end of the day, me plus Jack equals three people, not two. Or, you know, Jack, you complete me. Jack, you complete me. And by that, what I'm really saying is that, you know, the sum of the parts is greater than, if you just look at the parts in isolation. That's the 1 + 1 = 3 scenario. And the you complete me is that, Jack has skill sets and traits that I don't have. So if I can figure out how to stay in my lane and Jack stays in his lane, and we can put our egos aside for a minute, because anytime you have a dispute, you can always trace it back to, you know, I could be very vulgar here, but basically we were not able to keep our ego in our pants. um, it always just comes back to that at some base level. So, the first key thing to successful partnership is just remembering why you were in the partnership in the first place, which is 1 + 1 = 3, or Jack, you complete me. There's not really a lot of other good reasons, because if Jack does not complete me and Jack is just me times two, like that's great, but do I really need two me's? Most people would argue, no, Adam, one of you is more than enough. Thank you very much. So, it really needs to be for those reasons. So, Jack, you came across, some of the ideas around best practices. If you wouldn't mind sharing them, that'd be super awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. So, to continue on the analogy, many years ago, over 25 years ago, at my wedding reception, I said to the crowd, it's a very large crowd because, traditional Italian, Latino, Catholic-ish wedding, was that there are only two ways to that you get to the sum of the two being more than the two individuals together. And I said, in other words, that 1 + 1 = 3. And I said, creative accounting and through marriage. And I guess I should have added a third category, that all of us can do that in partnerships. So I did find some articles that went through the good and the bad, and I was going to talk about, good business partners, blah, blah, et cetera. So, but I'm going to start with the things that, the bad list, essentially, and you'll see they're reciprocal, they're a converse, complementary, however you want to look at it. So, on this list that I found, so there were 4 or 5 things: mixing personal relationships with business. And that includes family relationships, that includes fraternal, sorority, all those things, those relationships that you build that are close and personal. And it's not that there's anything wrong with that, but the challenge is there is a presumption, because you get along on a personal level, that you're going to get along on a business level. And that presumption permeates into the business relationship. And many times that is true, but many times it's not. So kind of a mental separation between personal and business, and doing an assessment on the front end as to whether or not you're really good business partners just because you were good roommates in college, in that kind of perspective. Another is unequal commitment amongst partners. So many times you'll have the money person, and then you'll have the sweat equity person. And there is a disagreement as to the value of the sweat equity when it comes down to tight times or decisions that have to be made. And it is, well, I'm the one who put in the money, so I'm the one who should ultimately decide on how we move forward on a certain issue. And so, the commitment needs to be not just the what is put into it, but also the commitment after the fact. Who's going to be doing certain aspects of the business? Who's going to be negotiating with suppliers? Who's going to be out there doing business development, marketing, and those kind of things? And those things should be set up kind of on the front end. Another interesting one, which I think is maybe obvious but not maybe thought of, is the lack of success. And we all want to do really well sooner than later. And so the suggestion is to be patient and understand that there's going to be not necessarily failures. There will be failures, but understanding that the not getting to what you may deem as success. So that's first issue, is what does success look like for each partner, but also kind of collectively, what are those benchmarks? But also that your tolerance to not achieving that success in your own mind, but also collectively, is there going to be a problem if you don't get to a certain point and then someone saying, I'm out because I'm just spending too much time and effort, too much money into that. So, and then differing values. So the suggestion of before you enter into a business relationship, and specifically talking about why you and they want to become entrepreneurs. What is the vision? So I would say, what is the mission and the vision? Those are, to me, separate statements, separate things. I think people kind of put them together, mission and vision, but those are by the book, conceptually, two different things. Business advisors will tell you that. And then what are the short-term, medium-term, and long-term objectives? And what does that look like? So again, getting back into what success looks like. Personality clashes. So specifically, who are the risk takers? Who are more highly motivated, and what motivates them? How would each of the partners handle a difficult situation, such as dealing with problematic employees, customers, and vendors? Expectations, managing, meeting, exceeding, not getting to where your expectations. And then again, perseverance and patience to handle starting the business, growing pains, and not going overboard and taking successes as being, okay, hey, now we've made it, we can kind of let our foot off the gas completely. A lot of times it is, you see that in sports. Team scores a goal, they kind of let their guard down, and the opposition comes right down, marching down the field, and scores a goal within 30 seconds because you let your guard down for a little bit. So those are kind of some of the I would say bad things that you can turn into good. And then just to share kind of two other quick lists. So this was, I found on a Tony Robbins article. So good business partners are solution oriented, have a reputable history, share your values, will sign a fair agreement, communicate openly with each other, complement your skills. So what Adam was saying, not necessarily a clone of each other, but have some complementary and different skill sets. And good business partners do their work. And the concept of it's not a bad thing to have a partnership agreement, from the aspect of it being a prenuptial, kind of similar to a prenuptial agreement, because you are hoping for the best, but anticipating that maybe that doesn't work out. So what happens when that happens? And we've talked about that in previous sessions, specifically with respect to management, succession planning, and exit planning. So you can always go back and take a look at those. And then another article, just to show you that these are common themes. The 5 qualities of a successful partnership that they state is open communication, accessibility, flexibility, mutual benefit, and measurable results. And what I liked about that article is they broke out measurable results into 2 different categories, and KPIs, key performance indicators, indices, financial KPIs. such as leads generated, active deals, or completed sales, and then strategic KPIs like awareness, engagement, customer satisfaction. So all those metrics. So not only, so what, I guess what I'm saying in kind of totality and summing all of this kind of data and advice and other things is that there is a psychology of the interaction between the individuals, and there is a psychology related to the data that is promulgated from the operation of the business. And then the third component is how that is interpreted, how that is internalized, how that is externalized, and how does that mesh with the relationship. None of us have a crystal ball, but we need to ask these difficult questions of our business partners to make sure that we understand what we're getting into. Now, I will say in an organization like mine, where you have 280 plus attorneys in various cities and various states, all of our personalities are not going to mesh. All of our objectives are not going to mesh. And that's fine. When you are with a handful of people those are your business spouses, then there needs to be a little more care into establishing a relationship, making, the dating phase, the marriage phase, the honeymoon phase, and then constantly checking in with each other to make sure after the honeymoon is done that the relationship is still moving forward. Now, what I didn't say, and I meant to say at the beginning, is we could, if someone came in late into this conversation, a lot of these things, we could be having a marriage counseling session at this point, because it's about relationships. And I was reluctant to say that because we're obviously focused on business stuff, but this is what we're talking about applies just in life in general, as being a human being and understanding and interacting with other people. So whether it's a family relationship, a marital relationship, a business relationship, a lot of these concepts are going to apply. My point in saying that is you are either purposefully or subconsciously already doing a lot of these things in your own personal life, whether you realize it or not. The friends that you choose, the way that you interact with your kids and your spouse, and you interact with coworkers, you're already doing this stuff. So now I'm suggesting that you apply these things in your business relationships moving forward in a more purposeful way. So I am not a licensed therapist, just so you know. This is, again, general advice, but it seems to be that these kind of things work with my clients, and for me personally, for the most part.
Yeah, and to piggyback on that theme, Jack, because although I'm not a licensed therapist, I've been in enough therapy that I believe that I now have the credentials to be able to speak credibly on the subject. To use the marriage analogy theme a little bit more, think about, we're talking about these topics like mission, vision, value, strategy, stuff like that. If you're to draw the marriage analogy, let's just start with the basic. Before getting married, most people would agree that an important item to discuss is whether or not you want to have kids. Like that's kind of a big deal. And if you don't have agreement on having children, while there's a chance you may agree on that in the future, the more likely scenario is that you'll end up with the Mason-Dixon line and then the Civil War. I had to get that reference in, since I've lived all the way across the country and we're now in the South, Jack. So there's no, like, that's not one of those deals like that, hey, do we want to have kids, Jack, or not? I don't know, no, I don't think so, but maybe one day in the future. Okay, we'll compromise and get married. Worked out that marriage ever? I mean, seriously, there might be a few that did work out, but people do that in business all the time. And the version of that question is, how big do you want to get and in what time frame? Are we building this company to sell it or to hand it off to the next generation? You know, like some real core foundational type items. In the marriage scenario, you know, understanding what kind of lifestyle your spouse wants to lead. I'm down with subsistence living, putting every dollar underneath the mattress, saving for the future. And by the way, I'm not going to work any harder or earn any more money than is required to live that lifestyle. And if your spouse is like, well, I kind of always had this dream that we sort of have, a couple houses and be hanging out with the Clooney's in Lake Como, um, you got a misalignment. Same thing in a business partnership. All I really want to do, Jack, is I just want to kick out a quality product, have a place to go and work with some good. If Jack's like, no, dude, I'm like building generational wealth around here. If that's a scenario, like I need to be willing that, okay, if I'm still going to enter that partnership, I need to be willing then to say, well, then Jack, it's probably better that you be the person in charge. you know, I'm not going to hold you back from that. I'm just going to do my part. So it's the real, like when people say, oh, we're totally aligned on our mission, on our strategy and mission. It's like, are you really? Because if a simple exercise to make that determination is to get your ownership together. And it's just always funny when I do this. Get your ownership together and just say, okay, real quick, you've got 30 seconds to write down this answer. How big will you be, revenue size and employee count, in 5 years? That's it. Nothing more. Just simple exercise. You have 30 seconds to write down your visceral reaction. And it's interesting to see nine times out of 10, there's not a, like, you don't have the same answer, and most of the time those answers are sometimes 100% different. Meaning Jack's answer is actually double mine. And when you think about the effort level to reach Jack's, like, that's going to be required. I mean, that's going to require that when there's discretionary cash, we reinvest it back in the business. It's going to require a lot of headaches. Like, it's not easy to go from 5 employees to 20 employees to 100 employees. Like, those are not easy items, to do. You got to give up a high degree of control. Like, there's lots of, so those are examples of like getting like spending the time to get the basic alignment right. And then having a, just like, I'm sure that Jack has never been to marriage counseling. But I've allegedly heard from a marriage counselor that date nights and communication with your spouse is important at scheduled frequent intervals. I don't know why then I would think not communicating at regularly scheduled intervals with my business partner about our shared ambitions and dreams would be not important. Then, I mean, in other words, like, if I don't do that stuff in my own home life, I can see the direct result and it's not good. So but yeah, life comes up, gotta take the kids here, gotta go here, gotta do this. Like, should we do the day nights tonight? No. All of a sudden a year goes by, you haven't had a date night and you're wondering why you're not connecting. It's the same. It's no different in a business partnership in terms of when we say work, it's not like it's a lot of work. I mean, in other words, like, you could have a pretty healthy marriage on, one date night a week, and then making sure you've got 15 to 30 minutes of meaningful interaction on a daily basis. That's work to do it, but from a time perspective, that's not a lot. And it's really no different, in a business partnership. Like, it's work and you actually have to do it, but it's not like it's an amazing time commitment relative to the pain and suffering associated with having it go bad. No different than the pain and suffering associated with a failed marriage.
Yeah, and I think that, so I would say that communication is one of the highest key components of the relationship. And your point that it has to be continual communication. So the one example of that is that, and the reason for it is that circumstances change, and not that it goes from good to bad. It is just that they change. Let's say that the relationship was the partners a mixture of either all unmarried individuals or some married and some not married, and then get married. Okay. And then unbeknownst or unanticipated to the unmarried person, that they will find out when they have kids, and then when they are married and continue on in those relationships, that things change for the good. Maybe, and so priorities may change. And so those things need to be addressed and need to be understood. There was, I think I mentioned this previously, this book that I was reading, Never Split the Difference. And the book was about this former FBI agent that was a chief worldwide negotiator for, I think, both terrorist related issues, but specifically where there's hostages involved. So he's a hostage negotiator, apparently became very good at it. And he'd been doing it for a long period of time, where he learned and was a student of the psychology of people in order to understand what's motivating them. And I had suggested, I think in a previous session, that is an important aspect of understanding what is going on in the other person's mind and in their lives. And the example was that how that changed within a very short period of time. And I think I told this story, but I'm gonna tell it again, which was hostage situation, bank robbers. They thought they were going to get away. They got caught. It was then the thought process was not that they understood that they were not going to get away. They were concerned about not getting killed by the police. And this was somewhere in Europe, where the thought was that the police have a little more discretion in using firearms to resolve a situation. So they were concerned about that. But then through the negotiation process, it was, okay, what is important to this person? And it ended up being, and so they were trying to figure things out. And then they started talking about religion. And then so the story goes that this FBI agent went home that night, was thinking about, how am I going to get through to him? And then he's like, I need somehow some connectivity. And then the word stewardship popped into his head. And he used that word in the discussion, and it like flipped a switch in this person's mind and said, I understand where you're coming from, Mr. Bank Robber. You feel like you're a steward based on your faith on certain things. And it turns out that, okay, whether it was legit or not, that it was an escape hatch for this person, but that was motivating that person in that moment. Circumstances had changed. So that's an extreme example of that. But the analogy is that, understanding what is going on, and don't assume that just because it was that way yesterday or last week or last month or last year, that is what is on your partner's mind moving forward. And I think that what I see in a lot of negotiations, after the bullets have been fired, the mean things have been said, the ultimatums have been given, the litigation has commenced, that we get people into the same room. And I hear a lot, I didn't know that. I didn't realize that. Now I understand your perspective. Now, granted, that doesn't happen all the time. It actually doesn't happen very frequently in negotiations, but it does happen. And so if you can get to that point of the light bulb coming on sooner than later, it will save you a lot of pain. And I'm talking about not just when there is a clash, but prior to that, to try to avoid the clash to begin with, to understand when you're making decisions and steering your business via the partnership, that you end up going in the direction that you want to be going, rather than in your mind resisting, but not being outward and overt about that. I know that that's what we thought we would be doing 10 years ago, but things have changed. Let me tell you about that. So it takes a certain amount of bravery on everyone's side to be able to be very authentic in that conversation.
Yeah, so let's take a minute to open it up, see if we've got any questions from the audience. All right. So the next thing that I'll hit on again are just, some best practices. And again, I didn't make this stuff up. I mean, this is from, whether you read Scaling Up, the 4 Disciplines of Execution, Traction, which advocates the entrepreneurial operating system, whatever your business book of choice is, 5 Dysfunction of a Team, it doesn't matter. Your hygiene, in other words, like, hey, Jack, I've got, chronic, my marriage is falling apart. Well, when's the last time you guys did a date night or anything like that? Never. Okay, well, let's start with some basics. I'm chronic, diabetes and blah, blah. Well, right, you're 400 pounds and your diet is horrible. Let's start there. Like, I didn't mean to, I'm not saying that to sugarcoat like people that have health issues. My point in saying, like, you gotta look at the habits, first. So from a partnership perspective, and this is more the EOS flavor, but it's anything's going to be real similar, is that you kind of start with, getting aligned on, as Jack had said, mission, vision, and values. And there's ways to do that, getting aligned with where we want to be, 3 years, 10 years down the road. And then once you do that, what are we going to do this year? Once we decide what we're going to do this year, then we have frequent, quarterly updates on, okay, we making progress. And then just a weekly check-in, is everything going like we thought it was going to go? And if not, what do we got to do to get it back on track? You can do that and have a healthy, functional partnership with that total requirement, is basically maybe 10 total days out of the year when you count having a weekly meeting, which is just not a lot. When you think about it, like, in other words, Jack, I'll tell you what, option A, take about 2 weeks of your time to have a healthy 2 weeks of your time every year to have a healthy, stable business following this prescription. Or option B, you can lose everything, years of your life, maybe even your marriage, because you're so stressed out, and have financial ruin. Which one do you pick? Like, in other words, like, it's not, it's not a lot, but you do actually just have to do it. But that's really what we've seen to be, the best practices for smoking out and dealing with issues is, take the time. It's about 2 total weeks a year when you add it all up to get the same page on the strategy, vision, values. What are we going to do this year? Revisit it quarterly. And then each week check in. Are we still making progress? And is the business going? Any issues we need to deal with in the business that we need to get resolved? It's not easy, but it's real simple.
Yeah, and I think something I was thinking about, because we do this here, and is that having 2 types of gatherings amongst the owners. One is a business gathering where we're talking about business. We put financials up on the screen, and we have some pretty challenging conversations as to, okay, why are we doing this? Should we not be doing this? Hey, patting ourselves on the back, we're doing, good on these metrics. The other is a social event where we try not to talk about business stuff, but there are some people who just can't resist, which is fine. But, having it in a social environment to foster those relationships, it is sometimes we find out things that are going on in a person's life that may impact the business and their performance and their participation in the business. Like, there is a health issue with a parent or with a child, or some other life challenge that is going to take them away from the business or impact that. So then you, okay, table that in your mind, but then maybe address it maybe the next week or sometime in the near future to say, okay, how can we help? How can we be proactive rather than being reactive when that person's numbers are down or they're scrambling for assistance with attorneys who can handle certain situations in their absence. So those kind of things happen. So again, I'm not saying that we know how to do it all. I know how to do it all, but just some suggestions that I've seen here at home, my business home, but also with clients that are doing things to make sure that there is collaboration and communication rather than waiting until a crisis situation happens and you're forced to have that collaboration and communication in a very stressful environment rather than in an environment where you can think through things, share ideas, and move forward from that point.
Yeah, no, and I'd kind of venture to say, again, using the marriage counseling analogy again, Jack, I'm sure that no marriage counselor has ever had a couple show up in the office that said, yeah, no, we're doing everything, date night, totally on the same page about blah, blah, blah. We're communicating regularly, every day, meaningful. We both agree, in our heads, yep, this is all happen. We got shared common goals, common values, on the same page with how to raise kids, on the same page with money, da, 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 da. But, we still need you to help us out because we want to get divorced. I'd suspect you also have never had partners in your office that said, Jack, we're ready to break this thing up. They could say that they were doing any of that stuff, right?
Yeah, of course not. It's like, okay,
Yeah.
let's go down to the bar and kind of chill out for a minute and let's figure this out. But yes, I agree with you. Yeah, I don't think I know anybody who was willing to pay what $200, $300 to do exactly what you just said, which is, yeah, everything's going good, but we still want to break up kind of thing. So, but yeah, absolutely.
Right. All right. Well, we're bumping up on our 11:45 stop. So I will ask again from the audience, does anybody have any questions for us before we wrap this thing up? And on a webinar, you could, normally they would say, hey, let there be 30 seconds of awkward pause. I don't think that's appropriate on a webinar. It's more like I'll give about 5 seconds. All right. Well, as always, this will be posted up on the Shoemaker and the BGW respective YouTube channels, probably sometime today or tomorrow, for those of you that want to recheck out some of the content. In the meantime, if you have any questions, about this or anything really, you're always welcome to reach out. If you got any ideas for topics, make sure you hit us up. But otherwise, we will be back in the saddle next week and enjoy having you guys here. Anything you got that you want to close with, Jack?
All good. Have an enjoyable rest of the week and weekend. Try to stay out of the heat. Apparently it's going to be heat index like 105, 107 tomorrow. So drink a lot of water. How about that? I'll end on that.
All right.
All right.
See you
Thank you.
guys.
Bye.
All right. Bye.